I stepped off the transport plane expecting the familiar rush of relief that usually hits a soldier after too many months away from anything resembling normal life. I had pictured this homecoming countless times during deployment, letting the imagined warmth of it carry me through nights when the world narrowed to dust, cold metal, and the hum of distant danger. I thought I would feel anchored again the moment my boots hit American soil, as if the ground itself would welcome me back with the steadiness I had been craving since the day I boarded the plane heading in the opposite direction. But what I felt instead was a strange emptiness, like the part of me that belonged here was still lagging a few thousand miles behind, unable or unwilling to catch up. The sky looked the same as I remembered, but somehow brighter, almost too bright, as if trying to hide how much had changed underneath it. The military bus dropped us off near the base gates. I watched the other soldiers step off with the kind of joy that comes when anticipation finally meets reality. Some ran toward waiting families, others scanned the crowd with nervous hope. I searched for my own family and spotted them. Not running, not waving, not even smiling in a way that made sense. My son stood with the restless energy of a child desperate for connection. My daughter guarded behind him, and my wife slightly to the side as if distancing herself from her own homecoming. My son reached me first, and his hug hit with a force that nearly knocked me off balance. He was older now, taller than I expected, carrying a mixture of relief and worry in the way he clung to me. My daughter offered a small gesture of acknowledgement, hesitant and uncertain. But my wife, the woman who used to meet me like I was returning from another planet, moved toward me with a stiffness that felt rehearsed. The space between us had never felt so wide, even when oceans separated us. On the drive home, I studied the familiar streets, trying to absorb their details again. What used to feel comforting now felt foreign. The houses looked the same, but quieter somehow, like stage props that had outlived their performance. The kids' chatter rose and fell in uneven rhythms. My wife kept her gaze locked forward, hands tight on the wheel, shoulders tense in a way I couldn't ignore. When we finally pulled into the driveway, I felt a strange pressure in my chest. The house looked exactly as I remembered. Pale siding, trimmed bushes, a wind chime my daughter made years ago still swinging lazily under the porch. But stepping inside felt like crossing into hostile territory. There was a new scent in the air, subtle but unmistakable. A mix of unfamiliar cologne and a detergent we had never used before. The living room looked staged, the kind of cleanliness that comes from someone preparing a space for appearances rather than comfort. I walked through the rooms with my duffel still slung over my shoulder. I noticed small changes first. A new blanket on the couch, a missing photo frame, the absence of my boots near the door where they always used to rest. Then came the bigger changes. A shelf rearranged. A drawer filled with items I didn't recognize. A jacket in the closet that wasn't mine. My wife moved through the house with the demeanor of someone who had already adapted to a different rhythm, one I had not been part of. She avoided meeting my eyes for more than a moment, and each glance carried a weight I couldn't decipher. It wasn't anger. It wasn't relief. It was something closer to guilt or maybe resignation. A quiet surrender to something she hoped I wouldn't force her to confront. Later that night, the house settled into its usual routines. Lights dimming, doors closing, footsteps echoing softly down hallways. My daughter retreated into her room with the kind of quiet fatigue that felt older than her years. My son hovered near me, sticking close as if he feared I might disappear again. My wife walked around us with a thin barrier of politeness, careful not to stay in the same room for too long. When we finally went to bed, she lay stiffly on her side, keeping her distance. The silence between us felt suffocating. Deployment teaches a man a lot about silence, the dangerous kind, the necessary kind, the kind that protects you, and the kind that betrays you. This silence belonged to the last category. At some point after midnight, I felt the mattress shift as she slipped out of bed. Her footsteps were soft but intentional. I listened as she descended the stairs, and minutes later, the faint glow of a phone screen lit up the hallway. A quiet vibration followed. Then another. Her movements were cautious, practiced. A person who didn't want to be overheard. I stayed where I was, staring into the darkness, feeling the sting of awareness sharpening inside me. Soldiers learn to read more than words and actions. They learn to read patterns, changes, the subtle signs that something is wrong long before the danger becomes obvious. And everything inside me registered this moment as the beginning of something I didn't want to face. The next morning, she acted normal, or rather, a version of normal so thin it almost felt mocking. The kids carried themselves with an uneasiness I couldn't ignore. My daughter avoided looking at her mother. My son clung to whatever scraps of routine he could find. Breakfast felt staged, every motion measured and strained. Over the next few days, I found myself adjusting to a home that no longer fit me. I tried to slip back into familiar routines, but everything felt off-balanced. The drawers contained items I didn't recognize. The pantry had new brands I never saw before. There was a second travel mug in the cabinet that didn't belong to anyone in the house. My wife's schedule shifted unpredictably, filled with vague commitments, late returns, and moments where her presence felt like an intrusion into my own home. One afternoon, I came across a stack of mail on the counter. Among the usual bills and catalogs were envelopes addressed to her from places I had never seen before. Businesses, gyms, a boutique hotel downtown. Places she had no reason to be. A thin layer of dust on certain items in the living room suggested they hadn't been touched in months, while newer decorations appeared in corners without explanation. She started leaving the house at odd hours, offering vague reasons as she walked out the door. She came back smelling faintly of something expensive and unfamiliar. Her hair was styled differently, her clothes newer, slightly more polished, as if she were trying to impress someone who wasn't me. A small gold bracelet appeared on her wrist that I hadn't bought, and the way she touched it absent-mindedly told me it carried meaning. One evening, I noticed her taking a call outside on the patio. She paced slowly, her voice low, her shoulders moving with an ease I hadn't seen in years. She ended the call abruptly when she noticed me in the doorway. Her eyes widened for just a second before she masked it with a neutral expression. In those moments, I didn't feel anger yet. What I felt was a creeping sense of disconnection, a widening distance that threatened to swallow the remnants of the life I thought we had. There was a version of her that existed somewhere else, a version I didn't know, a version she was hiding from me. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things, that reintegration after deployment was simply amplifying normal tensions. But every instinct honed on deployment told me the truth was far less forgiving. Something was happening behind the scenes, slowly and quietly, the way cracks appear in foundation long before the walls collapse. It became impossible to ignore the subtle shifts. The way my daughter flinched when her mother entered the room. The way my son's cheerful energy collapsed every time she left without explanation. The way the house felt like a place where someone else had been living during my absence. Someone who didn't belong here and had left traces I wasn't meant to find. The worst part wasn't the evidence itself. It was the feeling that I had returned to a life still in motion, a life that had learned to move without me, a life that had already chosen a direction I was not part of. Days blended together as I observed in silence, piecing together the quiet truth that lived in the corners of my home. I felt like an outsider navigating the shell of my old life, waiting to see how much had truly changed while I was gone. I knew then, with a sinking certainty, that the marriage I had fought to protect while overseas had already unraveled. Not through a single act, but through 1,000 small choices made in the spaces where my presence used to be. And though I tried to deny it, I knew I was not returning to the life I left behind. I was returning to the aftermath of its collapse. The days that followed swallowed me in a rhythm that felt more like surveillance than reintegration. I moved through my own home like an observer rather than a participant, taking note of the smallest details because the smallest details were the only honest things left in the house. I had lived through situations that demanded constant awareness. Patrols at night, checkpoints under tension, stretches of desert where danger hid behind silence, and now that same instinct had followed me home. Only this time, the threat wasn't incoming fire or a concealed device. It was something far quieter, far more personal, and far more corrosive. The unease began to take shape in ways I could no longer deny. I started noticing patterns, subtle, consistent, and unmistakable. My wife's schedule shifted in ways that made no sense for the life she claimed to be living. She worked late hours she never used to have. She left the house dressed in clothes I'd never seen her wear before deployment. Clothes that weren't for errands or meetings but for attention. The kind of attention a woman seeks only when she believes someone is actually looking. She guarded her phone like a soldier guards a weapon. Notifications vanished before she reached for them. The screen always faced downward. She carried it into the bathroom, the laundry room, even out to the mailbox. It never left her hand long enough for me to see anything beyond the reflection of my own suspicion in the glass. I began to develop a dark routine, counting the hours she was gone, listening for the sound of her car in the driveway, noticing the change in her footsteps as she entered the house. A woman in love walks with a kind of softness, even when she thinks no one is looking. A woman hiding something moves differently, lighter, faster, with a caution that betrays her. She walked that way now, as if every corner of the house might hold someone who shouldn't be listening. The kids sensed everything without understanding any of it. Children don't need explanations to recognize emotional fractures. They feel them the way they feel cold weather approaching. My daughter drifted further from her mother with each passing day. She lingered in her room, headphones in place, trying to construct a barrier between herself and the tension that hung like humidity in the air. My son clung to routines, grasping for stability in the only ways he knew how, wanting me to help with homework, wanting to sit beside me on the couch, wanting reassurance I didn't know how to give. The house itself began to reveal more truth than my wife did. I found a second travel mug in the cabinet, new, sleek, stainless steel with a logo from a gym she never joined before deployment. A jacket appeared in the hallway closet, too large to be hers, too modern to be mine. Receipts showed up in the trash from places she claimed not to visit. Restaurants known for dim lighting and tables set for two. A hotel keycard fell out of her purse one morning, slipping onto the floor in front of me, its logo stamped with the name of a place far from her supposed work location. I told myself to breathe. I told myself I could be wrong. But instinct rarely lies, and mine had saved my life more than once. The final thread that began to unravel the whole fabric came one afternoon when I picked up the kids from school. My daughter waited unusually far from her mother's car, refusing to approach until she saw it was me behind the wheel. When she got in, she avoided looking back at the building, her expression carved with something too mature for her age. She didn't say what happened, but the weight of her silence settled in the back seat like an uninvited passenger. My son sat unusually quiet beside her, eyes down, clutching his backpack as though bracing against something he couldn't explain. That evening, I watched my wife texting in the corner of the living room. Her posture changed with each reply, her shoulders lowering, her breath softening, her lips curving into the faintest smile. It was a softness she hadn't shown me since the early years of our marriage, as if someone else had inherited the version of her I once knew. She ended the conversation quickly when she noticed me watching. Her entire demeanor shifted back into guarded neutrality in an instant. It was the clearest tell of them all, affection turned off like a switch, but only when faced with the wrong audience. That night I lay in the dark again, listening to the familiar creaks and groans of a house aging around me. Deployment had taught me that silence can suffocate or reveal. This silence did both. My wife's breathing remained steady on her side of the bed, but it was the steadiness of a stranger, not a partner. At some point after midnight, the pattern repeated. The mattress lifted slightly under her weight. Her feet padded quietly across the floor. The faint glow of her phone lit the hallway once again. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. The truth had been whispering in my ear for days. Morning brought new evidence, more subtle, more painful. I found a different scent on her clothes. Not perfume but something masculine. Faint but unmistakable. She denied nothing because she offered no explanations. She simply moved through the house as though she were already halfway gone. My instincts hardened into resolve. The day I found the restaurant receipt tucked deep in her coat pocket. 2 meals. 1 bottle of wine. A date that matched one of her supposed late nights. A signature I didn't recognize. The man's name, careless and confident, sat on the bottom of the paper like a stamp of betrayal. Staring at it, I felt a strange calm wash over me. Not anger, not heartbreak, just clarity. The same clarity a soldier feels when he finally understands the mission objective after days of confusion. A quiet certainty, heavy but clean. The following days felt like moving through thick fog. I was present physically but mentally retreating, preparing for the inevitable collapse. My interactions with her became brief, painfully polite. She responded with a cold civility that confirmed everything the evidence had already told me. She was no longer invested in this house, this family, this life. The version of her who used to wait for me on porches, who used to write me letters during deployment, who used to laugh at small things. She had disappeared long before I came home. The breaking point came in a moment so ordinary it felt surreal. She received a message while we were all in the living room. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at it with an expression that gave her away completely, an involuntary warmth flickering across her face. She stepped outside to respond, leaving the rest of us in a silence that pressed against the walls. My daughter looked at me with an awareness she shouldn't have had to carry. My son asked if everything was okay, though he already knew it wasn't. I told him to finish his homework, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. My wife returned minutes later wearing the mask she thought would reassure everyone in the room. Didn't. Everyone sensed the shift. Everyone felt the disconnection. Everyone saw the truth she refused to acknowledge. In that moment, I realized with absolute certainty that our marriage had become an echo. Faint, hollow, and rapidly fading. I spent the next morning searching for a lawyer. It felt clinical, methodical, almost like completing a mission objective. I didn't move with anger. I didn't move with vengeance. I moved with the calm of a man who has run out of denial to hide behind. I didn't need her confession. I didn't need confrontation. I needed resolution. The lawyer listened, reviewed the evidence, and outlined the path forward. She spoke with the kind of firm confidence that left no room for doubt. This wasn't salvageable. My wife's pattern of behavior, the abandonment, the neglect toward our children, the affair, all of it formed the foundation I needed to build an exit. Walking out of that office, I felt a heaviness and a relief merging into something bittersweet. I wasn't walking away from my family. I was walking away from the illusion that one still existed. When I got home, the house felt colder than usual. My wife moved through it without acknowledging me, without acknowledging anything at all. She was in her own world now. A world she had chosen without me, without the kids, without the marriage she once fought to build. That night, the silence between us grew so vast that it felt like we were living in two different realities. She kept her distance, her eyes drifting past me like I was a shadow. The kids clung to me more tightly than ever. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the hurt and betrayal, a new sense of purpose began to take shape. A quiet, steady determination to protect what mattered. To shield my children from the fallout. To rebuild a life from the pieces she had left behind. The truth had fully revealed itself. Nothing was left to interpret. The marriage was already over, only the paperwork remained. The night the truth finally settled into my bones was strangely quiet. Not the soothing quiet that follows rain, but the hollow kind that fills a house when something inside it has died long before anyone admits it. I sat in the living room long after the kids had gone to bed, listening to the faint hum of appliances and the intermittent groan of old floorboards as if the house itself were shifting under the weight of everything unsaid. My wife moved around upstairs with the restless energy of someone packing emotions in boxes she had no intention of opening again. There was no explosive moment, no breaking dishes or raised voices. The end of a marriage rarely arrives like a thunderclap. It arrives quietly, like rot spreading through beams until one day the structure simply can't support itself anymore. And that night, I felt the final crack give way somewhere deep inside me. I knew she was leaving long before I heard the faint click of the closet door opening. Her movements had a strange kind of finality, deliberate, steady, unhurried. She wasn't running. She wasn't confused. She was finishing what she had started months before I ever stepped foot back into this house. I didn't go upstairs. I didn't need to. The truth had been unfolding in front of me piece by piece, and now I was witnessing the last piece fall into place. Sometime near midnight, she came down with a suitcase. Not hidden, not disguised. A simple gesture of departure, as if leaving were just another errand she had to check off her list. Her footsteps were controlled, each one taken with the caution of someone stepping across familiar terrain that no longer belonged to her. She didn't look at me as she passed through the living room. She didn't glance at the family photos on the wall. She didn't pause at the sight of our children's backpacks hanging by the door. She simply walked out, crossing the threshold like someone walking out of a hotel room she no longer planned to return to. The sound of the door shutting behind her was softer than expected. It didn't slam. It didn't echo. It was a simple closing of space, a quiet punctuation to a story she had already rewritten for herself. Her car engine hummed to life, headlights sweeping across the living room window before disappearing into the night. I sat motionless, watching the shadows settle back into place, knowing the house had shifted in a way that was irreversible. After she left, the stillness became heavier. My son stirred upstairs, murmuring in his sleep. My daughter rolled over in her room, shifting beneath blankets that suddenly felt too thin to protect her innocence from the truth unfolding downstairs. The responsibility of their fragile world pressed against me with a weight stronger than anything I had carried overseas. The next morning, my daughter descended the stairs slowly, sensing the change instinctively. She glanced at the empty kitchen, the untouched coffee pot, the absence of her mother's keys on the counter. Her eyes asked questions she wasn't ready to voice, and I answered them with the kind of steady presence I hoped would anchor her. My son looked smaller that day, lingering at the doorway as if waiting for someone to appear behind me. When she didn't, he turned away, clutching his backpack straps with the kind of quiet resilience that always breaks a father's heart more than any battlefield ever could. The house felt colder after that night. Not physically, but in a way that clung to the walls. Rooms she used to fill with noise now held only the echo of footsteps that no longer belonged to her. The air carried the faint scent of her perfume for a few days, a lingering reminder that even in leaving, she left traces. Eventually, even that faded, replaced by the simple smell of laundry detergent, stale coffee, and childhood. The smell of a house adjusting to a new reality. In the days that followed, she didn't come back for explanations. She didn't return for her forgotten coat or to check on the kids. She sent one brief notification through her lawyer, a simple acknowledgement that she had moved out. The message carried no emotion, no regret, no mention of the children she had given birth to. It was a line drawn with the clinical precision of someone surgically removing herself from the remnants of a life she no longer valued. I found myself walking through the house often, taking inventory of the changes. A section of the closet now stood empty. A collection of framed photos had vanished from the wall. Drawers she once used now sat open and barren. She had taken only the things that mattered to her new life, leaving behind everything tied to the life she once shared with us. The first weekend after she left, I did what soldiers do best. I built a plan. Not a plan for her. Not a plan to win her back. A plan to stabilize the household she abandoned. A plan to give our children a life that didn't depend on her presence or absence. I organized meals, coordinated with teachers, created new routines that gave structure to the spaces she vacated. Each night, after the kids fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table sorting through legal documents, organizing evidence, preparing for the court battle ahead. Not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. A parent who walks away from her children without a backward glance forfeits the privilege to dictate the terms of their lives. And I refused to let her instability shape the future of the two people who still believed in the foundation she had helped build and then abandoned. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I found a shirt of hers tucked in the bottom of the hamper. It was one she used to wear on lazy Sundays, soft, worn around the edges, carrying the faint scent of days when our life felt simple. Holding it felt like touching a ghost. I set it aside carefully, not knowing what to do with it, not knowing if it still belonged in this house. Eventually, I placed it in a box with a few other things she had forgotten. A box that carried no emotional weight for her, but felt unbearably heavy to me. A week passed, then 2, then 3. She didn't call the kids. She didn't check in. No questions about their school, their health, their nights without her. She didn't ask how they felt or what they needed. It became glaringly clear that she hadn't just left me. She had left them too, in a way far more painful than anything she had done to me. The breaking point for me wasn't her departure. It was seeing how quickly the kids began adjusting to her absence. My daughter stopped checking the window for signs of her returning. My son stopped asking where she was. Their silence carried a sorrow more profound than tears. Children letting go because holding on hurts more. I filed for divorce officially the following Monday. The lawyer reviewed everything with a measured calm that made the whole process feel procedural rather than emotional. Evidence of infidelity, evidence of abandonment, evidence of unstable behavior around the children. The case built itself. My home became quieter, but not empty. The kids began smiling again. Not constantly, but enough to remind me that healing doesn't require an apology. It requires stability. I took them to the park more often. We cooked dinners together. We created new traditions to replace the ones she had taken with her. Nights were the hardest. Not because I missed her, but because I was adjusting to the version of myself that no longer depended on her presence. I realized how much of my identity had been tied to being a husband, a protector of something already gone. Now, I had to redefine myself as a father rebuilding a life from the ashes of a marriage that had ended long before I acknowledged it. Over time, the pain dulled into something quieter, a bruise instead of a wound, not forgotten but no longer bleeding. The clarity that followed felt cold but necessary. I was not walking away from love. I was walking away from neglect, betrayal, and an illusion. The marriage did not shatter in one moment. It eroded silently until it could no longer stand. She had left long before she packed that suitcase. And I finally understood that love does not survive in a house where truth is unwelcome. I didn't lose a partner. I lost a stranger wearing my partner's face. And now it was time to rebuild from the foundations she abandoned. The day the divorce papers were finalized felt strangely unremarkable, as if the universe had decided that endings didn't need thunder or spectacle. The courthouse stood in its usual modest indifference, a building that had seen far too many families fracture to offer sympathy for another one. I walked through its doors with a steady gait, not out of confidence, but out of necessity. I had 2 children depending on me now, and there was no room left for hesitation. Inside, everything moved with the mechanical precision of an institution built on human missteps. Papers were filed, signatures gathered, boxes checked, and documents reviewed. My lawyer guided the process with practiced efficiency, her calm presence grounding me in the moment. I watched my own name printed beside words like custody, division, dissolution. Words that once would have shattered me now felt like simple acknowledgments of a truth long settled. She arrived a few minutes before the hearing began, stepping into the hallway with the quiet poise of someone who had already moved on from the life she was about to sever. She wore clothes that reflected the person she had chosen to become, sleek, polished, detached from the simplicity she once embraced in our home. She didn't look in my direction. She didn't glance at the courtroom door. Her focus hovered somewhere far away, as if this entire process were nothing more than an administrative inconvenience. Our eyes met briefly when the hearing began, and in that single moment, everything became clear. Whatever love she once had for this family had dissolved long before her body walked out of our home. Her gaze held no remorse, no conflict, no hesitation. Only the calm certainty of someone who believed she had chosen the right escape. And perhaps in her mind she had. The judge reviewed the evidence methodically. Infidelity, abandonment, neglect, emotional instability, absence from the children's daily lives. Each point landed with the cold precision of truth, building a framework for the decisions that followed. The verdict came swiftly. Full physical custody awarded to me, with limited supervised visitation for her. She didn't protest. She didn't show surprise. She simply nodded once, as though she had expected this outcome all along. When the final signature dried on the paper, something inside me shifted. Not a sudden release, but a gentle unwinding of tension I had carried for far too long. She walked out of the courtroom ahead of me, her steps quiet, her posture unbroken. She didn't look back. She didn't linger. She moved with the same determined detachment she had carried the night she left our home. Watching her disappear down the corridor felt less like loss and more like closure. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new shape. Not perfect, not painless, but real. The kids adapted faster than I expected, as children often do. They didn't speak much about her absence. They simply adjusted their routines around the reality that she wasn't coming back. My daughter became protective of her younger brother in ways I hadn't seen before, stepping into small spaces their mother used to fill. My son asked fewer questions with each passing day, preferring instead to focus on school, hobbies, and the comfort of predictable evenings. The house evolved too. The quiet no longer felt heavy or accusatory. It became peaceful. A calm that had been missing for years crept back into the rooms. I found myself opening windows more often, letting in fresh air, sunlight, and the faint sounds of neighbors going about their lives. I rearranged furniture, replaced curtains, added small touches that made the house feel like a place of growth rather than a reminder of decay. I cleared out the box of her forgotten belongings one afternoon, not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. The items inside carried no emotional weight now, just remnants of a story that no longer needed to take up space. I donated what could be donated, discarded what held no meaning, and kept only one small item for the sake of the children. Not for her sake, for theirs. The kids and I built routines that gave structure to our days. Dinners at the table, walks after school, movie nights on Fridays, chores shared fairly, homework at the same time each evening. Small rituals that stitched together the torn edges of our lives in the most quiet, gentle ways. There were moments when grief resurfaced, not for the woman she became, but for the woman she once was. The one who used to argue with me over weekend plans, who used to laugh at jokes that didn't deserve laughter, who used to braid our daughter's hair on school mornings. I mourned the version of her I had loved, not the one who left. That old version was gone long before the papers were signed. Occasionally, I wondered what had driven her into someone else's arms. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was longing for something we could no longer give each other. Maybe she had changed in ways neither of us had noticed until the gap between who we were and who we became grew too wide to cross. Or maybe the simplest explanation was the true one. She had outgrown the life we built and had no courage to leave gracefully. But those thoughts faded with time, losing their weight as the days progressed. Healing didn't come as an epiphany. It came gradually, through quiet mornings making breakfast, through evenings helping with homework, through nights when the house hummed with the soft rhythm of safety. Months later, I saw her again. Not in a courtroom, not in a planned meeting. Accidentally, she was stepping out of a cafe with the man she left us for, carrying the look of someone who had made choices she could no longer reverse. She didn't notice me. I didn't make myself known. Watching her from a distance felt like observing a stranger. The pang I expected never arrived. Instead, I felt a calm acceptance. Life had taken her somewhere else, and I no longer needed to understand that path. My daughter eventually stopped asking about her altogether. My son only mentioned her in passing, with the detached curiosity of someone remembering a faded memory rather than a person. I didn't encourage resentment or bitterness. I simply gave them stability, presence, and honesty, things she had abandoned. In time, the house transformed from a war zone into a refuge, a place where laughter returned in small but meaningful doses, a place where meals were eaten without tension, a place where bedtime didn't carry the weight of fractured loyalty. I became a different man too, not hardened, not cynical, but grounded. I learned how to carry pain without letting it dictate my life, how to move forward without dragging the past behind me like a heavy pack, how to accept that some endings are not failures, they are beginnings dressed in harsh clothing. There was one moment, months later, when I sat on the porch watching the sunset bleed across the horizon. The house behind me buzzed with the soft movements of children settling into their evening routines. I realized then, with a clarity I hadn't felt in a long time, that the life ahead of me was not a consolation prize. It was a second chance built on hard truth and quiet resilience. The marriage ended. The betrayal scarred. The trust shattered. But what remained was real. What remained was mine to protect and build. And in that moment of fading daylight, I understood something simple and undeniable. I hadn't been abandoned. I had been freed. The future no longer frightened me. It felt open, unclaimed, and honest. For the first time in years, I could breathe without the weight of someone else's lies pressing against my ribs. And that breath, quiet, steady, genuine, was the beginning of everything that came next.